I like this association around how a poem can actually create joyfulness, but also light. And light for me is something which is extended through language. So words that can be unearthed, old language, new language, combined language. And I call this delightfulness. So with that in mind, I'd like to take you on a little journey of light. Or as the late, great Leonard Cohen said, I'd like to take you on traveling light. So light is a shape-shifting element. It's also changing, it's moving, it's mapping the landscape. It's a constant flow of light. The little squares of light, there's a miracle of light, and there's a drenching rain, and there's a brilliant sun, and there are rainbows of light. And there's also the breaking wave of light. There's light over darkness, which is the name of this image of a photographer who sits in the ocean and takes images of breaking waves. So light is both a particle and a wave. And what I'd like to do is read you my first poem, which is The Breaking Wave off Karikari. And Karikari is a beach on the west coast of the North Island, which is close to where I live, which I've been visiting for many years. And I've spent many hours watching breaking waves, usually from a high vantage point, which is a rock in the center of the beach called the Watchman Rock. And I was reminded when writing this poem of a great wave, which is by Hokusai in 1831, called The Breaking Wave of Kanagawa, or The Great Wave of Kanagawa. And there's a sheer breathless force in this composition, which you see in the sort of natural movement of a wave. And I've described the poem, which I'm about to read, as a concrete one, which is in the form of a wave and resembles a series of waves on the page. But also, the language creates a crescendo and a reverberation of a wave breaking. So here is their first poem, The Breaking Wave off Karikari. Frame by frame, I watch the dark blue wave arc for light. By frame, I watch the dark blue wave arc for light. Frame, I watch the dark blue wave arc for white. I watch the dark blue wave arc for white. Watch the dark blue wave arc for white. The dark blue wave arc for white. Dark blue wave arc for white. Blue wave arc for white. Wave arc for white. Arc for white. For white. White. The next poem I'd like to read is also connected to that region. And there's a beach just to the south of Karikari called Whatipu. And Whatipu is the place in folklore where the Orpheus ship was shipwrecked. And it's the worst maritime disaster in New Zealand, with 187 people who drowned in 1863. The name Orpheus, I always think of as the light to dark and back to light. Orpheus in Eurydice is the reality to the edges of a surreal world and from one land to another. And Orpheus is translated as darkness of the night. So we get this tracking movement between the darkness and the light into the darkness and back to the light again, or the traveling light. And the journey from light to darkness happened in 1863, but also with the Greek myth of Orpheus, who turns back to catch a glimpse of Eurydice, and the age-old belief in Orpheus as a symbol of power, a secular spiritual voice of light. So the Orpheus is a metaphor for the entrance and for the resonating light. And this is an image a collage friend of mine did when I wrote this poem. And I always thought of him as bringing Orpheus back from the underworld. So this is Orpheus at Whatipu. The entrance signals where wavelengths break. At the outskirts of motion, the entrance sings, rising, falling, rising, sounding into sequence. Sometimes it blinds the horizon to be looking back. Red on black, two variable oyster catchers circle the shipwreck scene. The sun detonated, constellations torching the surface wake. So the line from the Watchman Rock on Karikari, with the sun sinking in the west, connects you to the Tasman Sea, which connects to Australia and also to the horizon. And the poet Alan Curnow said, simply by sailing in a new direction, you could enlarge the world. And when you go through Whatipu to the Manukau Heads, along the beach you have tramway tracks and steam engines, and you have a past history where steam engines such as the Sandfly, which is this little steam engine here, used to take kauri logs out to Whatipu and transport them along the coast out to England and to other parts of the world. And the kauri forests were then harvested. So what we have is the sailing ships, we have the ghosts, and we have also in this poem, myself staying at a friend's batch on the Watchman Rock on my 37th birthday and reading a collection of Walt Whitman's, where he writes, I, now 37 years old in perfect health, begin hoping to cease not till death. So I'd like to read this little poem, which is a haiku, which is 3 sets of 17 syllables, which is me staying on the Watchman and reading Walt Whitman on my 37th birthday. And it's called Ghost. Nest high on Watchman, 37 years old today, snap Walt Whitman. Zion track, Cowrie, a long drop sits south-southwest, mind drifts over sea. View through tunnel mouth, the sandfly steams out, onwards, white cloud of ghost moths. So then to wind around from the Manukau shoreline into the inlets and beaches now where I live, and to Little Huia Bay, Kaiterakihi Bay, Cornwallis, these familiar areas. And as there is a constant flow of light, we are born into a pure land. And Colin McCahon lived in one of those little bays, which was French Bay, just around the corner from where I live. And he was now sort of arguably New Zealand's foremost painter. And the text which is quoted often in these works, and this Gate 3, as you see, which was exhibited at Toitu, which is a gallery up the road from us, is text that he fused with his traditional religious beliefs and also the beliefs from a 12th century Japanese Buddhist monk, Shinran, who was the founder of a tradition known as Pure Land Buddhism. And for McCahon, light was both a metaphor for faith and enlightenment, which he began as a series of waterfall paintings in 1964. And as he inscribed these words onto his paintings, he also used language to express himself and how they felt and how he felt about the landscape in general. This is a little section from the I Am. And just down the road, a few hundred meters from me, lived a writer called Morris Shadbolt, who was a good friend of McCann's. And Morris Shadbolt had gone away, and his wife invited Colin McCahon over. And while Colin McCahon was there, he painted this bar for Morris Shadbolt. And Morris arrived back and said, "My God, what have you done to my bar?" But he painted elements of his artwork. And in the corner, you see, as there is a constant flow of light, we're born into a pure land. And with pop culture at the time, he wrote Buttercup Fields Forever instead of Strawberry Fields Forever, which is a riff on the Beatles. This was 1969. I was born in 1969, the same time this was painted. And that year there was Apollo 11, which there was the moon landing, there was the Vietnam War, there was Woodstock, there's an Easy Rider, the Beatles' Abbey Road. So there was a lot happening for artists at that point. So McCahon painted this work, and the next poem I'd like to read is A Constant Flow of Light, which is my poem based on Shadbolt and also based on McCahon. So it's a longish work, but just let it wash over you. A constant flow of light. As there is a constant flow of light, we are born into a pure land. There is a constant flow of light, we are born into a pure land. There's a constant flow of light, we are born into a pure land. A constant flow of light, we are born into a pure land. Flow of light, we are born into a pure land. Of light, we are born into a pure land. Light, we are born into a pure land. We are born into a pure land. Are born into a pure land, born into a pure land, into a pure land, a pure land, pure land, land. As there is there anything new? Parallel faith, walk, jump, towards spirit, spill this next, to display invention, claim a price, refuse style, statement like, reproduce photographs, destroy paintings, curiosity and mental vitality of intellect, numbers, visual, and mind, brush point irreverence, strange, this continue poetic, art and theatre complemented by fact, compose a preface, license verbal groupings of plain, eyes fixed on the infinite, an ideal and enchanted beyond, when illegible, join the ship, extrapolate definition of everything receptive, constant, the one mentioned dimension, object and paranoia, an invaluable ferment of the subconscious conversation, remarks, truculence, poem somnolence, parallel faith, McCahon, a constant flow, brain and thought presence. The skeleton wanders approximately present, explore a drawing of the Milky Way, mind empty, mind of artistic tributes, drawing visual haunts, spiritual acrobatics, quiet images rendered as poems. In mechanical insomnia, colloquial tone poem, eccentric dicta, remember, beliefs are not images. At first, at the end, uneven, and a new sequence of symbols, reality in favor of transformations. To signify, repeat, transformations ensure fusion, invention, a campaign into truculent outage. At first, pithily picturesque, a dream of random street sculpture. To declare war against melody, reveal an ironic accompaniment. Ailments, compare remains of priests, diplomats and politicians, advocators as a purge, individual compression acquires a formula for a disruption, bandage the dead, obscure traces of bust and restoration, of light, cowrie, light, deformed, a photograph of the open sea, a photographer oracle euphony elevated, ideal a creative exercise and obsession in direction, shutters capture rapid movement to dogged rhythmic crossing off. Because I am, phrases recoil, simple repetition, the limp figure of emotive words of recoil and reverberation, I, generalizations and a robotic figure moving, I, an inexpressible shelter of libation, stretched I, trammeled, godlike I. We are born statues, shadows of shadows, beating in worlds. Colloquialisms in line, a joke about moded rhetoric posted to an erotic surface, a parallel codified light, an illustrated journal of formal and articulate symmetry, fluency with supreme abolition, experiential word games, realities, a matter-of-fact narration, self-portraiture, the eye slit at the beginning, sockets, stumps, windows which deflect, displaced face, glint the systemic landscape, contextual, rhythmic movement, neurotic adoration of pulsates, split by kisses and elasticity, the glorious inhibition of body's lips, taste of lost death, an estuary curves into a pure land, a haphazard measured horizon, assembled density seen of the cupped, visual backbone composed of content memories, simulated incoherent monologue, a dream underworked, first-hand literary guesswork, verb reduced to multiple tokens, link a disparate triad, an irradiation of light, ground supplied as an indiscriminate clot, prefix inland, as there is the shortest route to the point, contours traced, farewell voice, so long feet, pick up the rhythms of a tide, escape, visualize precise details, 1969, little muddy, a sloping section generated in composting specifics of wings, kingfisher, tui, kiraru, the strong rhythmic current accelerates in balance, picture the mangroves, picture the night and pivots around the stars, multiplied alternatives, Sirius, the ironic dog star, a bend in the bar at the end of the track, Arapito, coastline Formica, sky, sea, of a trapeze, blue, black, ahipara, butter, strawberry blue, cup fields for a constant flow of light. We are born into a pure land. Ever the harmony harmonizes by disharmonies. The marriage of fault and lines, of I and goodbye, song of two waters, morning echoes indifference, awaits the surface signal, dawn chorus, ectoplasm at the top of the ranges, windows, oh, a stone's throw, scent of sky. At first eyes fixed, a magnetic destination, mast atop an immense field, Waiatarua, peace in raised hands, spring highlights of a hypothesis and destination, together a gradation, a constant flow of light. I'm just going to have a little sip now. So there's a long poem.
No, fantastic, Sam. Great.
Right. To continue on around the coast, here so we wind across around the Manukau shoreline, and we touch on these beaches where McCahon actually lived, French Bay, and he briefly adopted, while living there in the 50s, he left in 1962, the habit of rising early at dawn. And as the art historian Gordon Brown said, he would then contemplate the bush such that the forms of the trees would dematerialize. And he would get a sense of the spatial depth of the bush. And at its most intense, McCahon likened this illusionary effect to that of a blind man mentioned in Mark's Gospels, who on the first receiving the sight saw men as trees walking. And these images are from that period when he was in French Bay, where there is that Mondrian, that sort of cubist feel to the work, where he's starting to see reality broken as the eye would see it, rather than the realism, which I suppose was more traditional. So there's an abstraction and a dreamscape. And in 2017, a New Zealand artist, John Reynolds, painted a work called French Bay Darkly, which is a meditation on McCahon. And he modernizes this, and he brings this tree canopy and with its multiplicity of light and line. And for me, this series of signs and symbols was what McCahon said in 1957. I came to grips with the kauri and turned him in all his splendor into a symbol. So my next poem is called Kia Toitu he kauri, which is Maori for keep kauri standing. With kauri being threatened in the Waitakere Ranges with the kauri dieback, what I did was looking to see how McCahon had broken his constant flow of light and how I could write a poem to celebrate kauri and to celebrate the area that I was in. So my poem itself, this is a section from it. It stands as a kauri. The words are crossed out, and there was a contemporary American artist, Jean-Michel Basquiat, who said, I cross out the words so you will see them more. And the fact is that they're obscured, makes you want to read them even more. So there's an idea that once it's part of that, there's also in mine an X-Y axis of branch and trunk. There is also the idea of the reoccurring X, when conservationists would say if you mark a tree with an X, it's a tree death marking to be cut down. So I'll read the next poem, Kia Toitu he kauri, and it has a little epigraph by McCahon. I came to grips with the kauri and turned him in all his splendor into a symbol. X marks the spot. X mirrors Y. X, a visual backbone, zeros, horizontal and vertical, of light, X, kauri, twilight. Timeline to climb blind to counter the light. A scaffold detaches an unframed path. X, microbes branch out. Photosynthesis between subcatchments, the edge, an estuary, X, pathways, pathogens. An imprint, surface sediment, X, a constant flow of light. Zero light, holy light, first light, inner light, outer light, outlined light, framed light, filigree light, threaded light, said light, dead light, syllabic light, swallow light, born light, bone light, alone light, aligned light, lateral light, broken light, street light, neon light, headlight, sunlight, starlight, moonlight, ritual light, sacred light, secret light, tangential light, X, absentee light. Mint light, mineral light, scallop light, saline light, opaline light, open light, single light, straight light, scattered light, crushed light, shadow light, clear light, X, wave light, lapping light, falling light, travel light, talk light, scent light, digital light, past light, present light, faint light, green light, go light, ghost light, land light, liquid light, draw light, enter light, half light, scent light, liquid light, draw light, enter light, half light, scent light, slant light, shive light, sands light, still light, black light, white light, X, cut left, then right, the southwest squall. Horizon between top and toppled, X, center line, crisscross signs, scenic drive, Y, shape-shifting, helix shards of summer's soil-borne scent, a matrix, New Year's podcast, traces, X stands for kauri, sky high, dead center, X, symbolic, skeleton in nature, X, Y, Z. So this poem leads me now to the shapeliest work, which touches on titirangi, touches on kauri, and also was in my second collection called Halcyon Ghosts. And it was based on a friend of mine who died a couple of years ago, Harvey Benj. He took a sequence of birds, and I decided that I would replicate birds with words. And this brings us to that discussion of the idea of imitating nature, or nature imitating us as human beings. And my words, partly through this work, mimic the birds. Then as we get towards the end of my poem, the birds I felt became the words. So they were not even interchangeable. They were actually fused together. And maybe that is what we're trying to do as individuals, is to become whole and one, and create language at a point where it actually is not separated from the world. And that's why we have certain artistic forms of music and art that give us sometimes an interconnectedness. So for me, I was reminded of a film on Jackson Pollock, where Jackson Pollock's partner, Lee Krasner, talked about some of Jackson Pollock's work and said that she asked him why he didn't paint from nature. And his instance was, or his response, I am nature. So his explosion of work for him was a natural occurrence. In my poem, a couple of things. There's a sequence of 13, which is constructed where there are McCahn's number poems, there's Mark Rothko's poems, there are stanzas in the work that add up to 13. There are also areas of fragmentation where seasonal festivals are connected to the 13th, which are celebrations. There are memories of Titirangi, there's the winter solstice, and there's also the mythical bird, the kingfisher, which was supposedly would be in a nest floating at the winter solstice at a time which would calm the wind and the waves. So I'll take you through Halcyon Ghosts. And there are about 5 or 6 panels of birds. There are 2 epigraphs at the front. The first is by Michael Palmer, an American poet, and another by John Cage. Michael Palmer says, "And I dreamed we were still alive, dreamed we were yet to be born, dreamed we were yet to be." And John Cage says, "We are as free as birds, only the birds aren't free. We are as committed as birds, and identically." Halcyon ghosts dress as mock kings, swear kingdom come, wear coloured embroideries, waltz door to door, leave colanders on doorsteps, sing songs of ecology, hitch sunsets to horizons, dance ritual chain dances. Settle on wires at local crossroads, settle on wires at local cemeteries, invite gods to sing wishes of good luck, carry huia from house to house, wear masks and feather cloaks, perform winter miracles, bathe with priests in the Ganges. And bright coloured flags flew from stations, and a jar placed in Kingsland earth, both a passage and a chamber, an amp and ampersand, and round it the solar year, its 13 lunar cycles. And the moon travels 13 degrees across the sky, and the shadow of Thor, Great Dane dog Scar, crossed it to and fro. And each day we fed kingfishers and built nest-like structures, and in Titirangi tied different types of twine around tea trees, buried scones shaped like shoes, offered sacrifices of honey, bread and cheese, swallowed psalms, magenta, black, green on orange, and left 13 at the table, and Halcyon marked the edge, one of many circles. I'd like now to move on to my final poem for the evening. And it's a recent poem that I wrote for a friend or an acquaintance at my local cafe, who was the owner, who passed away much too soon. A Turkish man called Alex Izik, and he was the owner and the dreamer of a cafe called Deco in Titirangi. And you can see through this window here is a tree of life which people have put together for him to celebrate his life. He wasn't a close friend, but he was someone that was the connector of Deco and the connector of the restaurant and the community hub in Titirangi. He created a space for people, and he had conversations, and he enjoyed friendships and family. So when he passed away, I walked through and I would see, and you can see in the picture, a framed picture of him. And also I could see his exuberant smile and sort of his bustling presence in the cafe. And I thought I would construct this poem, which celebrates his Turkish heritage, also Titirangi, the Waitakere Ranges, and all the parts which I've discussed tonight. And also it looks at the talisman, which was this iconic blue-eyed amulet, which was the Nazar symbol, which is a universal sort of blue energy symbol that's supposed to absorb energy and create harmony with the individual. And this is what he took for his company's name and his logo from his Turkish heritage. So this poem is called Nazar for Alex Izik. At Deco, a blue shadow enters an open window. Where a tree of life lights the dead branches, words dance from limb to limb. On the horizon, under the fringe of heaven, God is in the sky, and the sky is blue. Amongst the great forest of Tiriwa Nazar, the eye of time accelerates out through the headland to where Tuhawa Uru circles the Black Sea, torching and passing through a center each of us remember. At the cafe entrance, a framed portrait opens a portal, a window to where eyes stare back at this world, a frame holding a familiar face, levitating in its blue glaze, hanging on to yesterday's silken thread. Laughter, how it drifts now, but holds a hand, how it dissolves but hints at the distant light. Osiris, the puppeteer of life, Pi Waka Waka darting beneath, betwixt an inventory of commotion, moving in between dawn and dusk. Oh, how each shadow intersects. Each individual enters and exits, steps through this book of gates. Outside, harriers circle treetops and cowrie sentinels stand their ground. On cue, the banter of the barista counterpoints to the carousel of customers, coffee cups of human emotions. And we realize too late that life is brief, how the Lord of silence transacts his kindness of years, where another smile is mounted in time and an eye for an eye unravels its narrative. And I am looking back at your photograph, a dream song looping in time, to a Turkish boy running through a valley of orchards and gardens, below a small hill past stone houses, where a path on a silk road winds down to a black river, where godwits weave worlds, winging their way across the ranges to the river mouth, into the blue. Well, thank you. I think, have I done enough?
Sam, amazing, mate. Fantastic. Great. No, really, really good. Appreciate you taking the time for us and, sharing your poetry.
Yeah.
No, great. Any comments, questions, thoughts for Sam? Oh, you've got a sore spell bell, mate.
That's okay.
So she.
I think Susanna raised her hand. Did you?
Yeah, just briefly.
Okay.
I just, first of all, thank you. That was a lovely experience listening to your and seeing your art, your poetry. I guess for me, I'm reminded of how much I love light and I am light and how I love to see the light in everything. So thank you for reminding me.
Right, that's great. Yeah, I mean, I just see it as one of those interconnected parts of life that you can never escape. It is with us, and I don't know. I even like the sound of the word delight, light, insight. There's lots of stuff which can interconnect with that.
Yeah.
So the more I repeat it, I suppose it's like a sort of a Hare Krishna chant. The more you repeat it, the more sort of joy you get from the word through repetition. And also it's a breath, that when you're repeating the word, you're actually breathing the word as well.
Yeah, and I think it has a beautiful energy.
Yeah.
That's over.
Yeah, and also, I mean, with the trees, you had the photosynthesis, you had the light that grows, the bush. And when I was looking at the Kauri poem, you had this amazing expression where they talked about the wood wide web. So trees are interconnected through their root systems and through their light breathing sort of growth patterns. So we have to also see that the world is interconnected.
Yeah. Many thanks.
Edward.
Thank you. That was lovely. A couple quick things. First off, have you considered, and maybe you already have, audio versions of your poetry, either you reading them or someone who would be equally good? And then a second different question is, what poets have influenced you in terms of your poetry? And secondly, we have mentioned the Hare Krishna. Do you see that as an influence, or what other areas do you see as having influenced your poetry?
Wow, there's some big questions there. I'll start with the first one. I have done a few, I did it during COVID. I was part of an anthology, so I did do a reading, which I think they did record, and I did some of the poems that I did tonight. Apart from that, it's primarily live readings within New Zealand, within Auckland. And secondly, the poetic spectrum is always changing. I think whatever you're interested in, you just read, and you fall back on the poets that I suppose are the ones that you're reading right now. And I've got a friend in America called Michael Palmer, who is I suppose they would call him more avant-garde, but he has a wonderful, lovely sense of language. There's a woman called Barbara Guest, who's someone I read, is another contemporary American. In New Zealand, we have Alan Kerner, who is an older poet, who I read a lot of. There are, I just think these days there's so much online that what you're taking is snippets and pieces. And in some ways, you've got to be careful you're not too derivative, because you can be influenced so much by someone that you can try to start to write like them. And it takes a while to actually step back and also be able to just find your own voice. Because I know some of the poems that I did write, I've always thought to myself, gosh, is that a successful or is that a failed poem? And usually when you're not sure what it's doing, how it's connecting, then you're creating your own voice. You're creating something which is quite unique to yourself. So you've got to be brave and just put it out there. So yeah, in that sense, and before I wrote poetry, I did enjoy sort of singer-songwriters who transitioned to poets. I did my degree, my master's degree was in philosophy. So there were lots of writers who I was looking at, who were looking at issues of the phenomenal and noumenal world. So yeah, there's been a whole, but the thing I love about language is that it's so playful that it can conjure up so many different interconnected sort of worlds for you. So I hope that sort of answers your question. I probably went off course, but.
Great. Sushi, you say something?
Yes, I'd like to thank Sam. I was transported to another world. I just feel so enriched. You see, I have always found understanding poetry difficult, though I had an excellent English teacher and we studied several poets, you know, like Oscar Wilde. I hope Oscar Wilde was a poet.
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah.
It was Wordsworth,
No,
Wordsworth and others. So yeah, she just, you know, brought them all to life, and it was just amazing. I had memorized a couple of poems too. So just your presentation just took me to another world. Thank you so much. And
glad
so
you
much
enjoyed
of theosophy. And I'd like to also say that coming from another country, you enriched my New Zealand experience by having written poetry about different places and different experiences. And the Kauri standing one, oh my God, that was just amazing. And to actually have it on a page, I saw the tree in that way you had arranged the page. And that idea that if you strike off a piece of writing, you will read it more. I don't remember who said it, but that's a great one too. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Sush.
You know, Sam, great. I mean, I liked, you mentioned another poet who we dreamed yet to be. And it's like in the theosophical framework, there's that void, that nothingness that is dreaming to be it, you know, before everything came about. There's something there that is, if you like, dreaming to be. There's this, you know, before the beingness, for being. So that was kind of cool. And you know, I am nature. You know, and it's interesting, you know, there's no distinction there. There's just that unity, what you were referring to. And it's like, you know, old Gate 3 Colin McCahon, you know, I've got that up on the wall in front of me, the print. So really nice to talk about that and that, you know, that segment.
You had the script in front of you while I was reading. You were fine.
Well,
the little epigraph you were quoting from was from Michael Palmer, and he also loves slippage in language. And he wrote also, sometimes I mean to write reason and I write raisin. And I thought that's quite a nice little point of slippage, because there's not that much difference between reason and raisin, really, except we have this huge expansive idea that it is such a, you know, one is an intellectual thing and one is this tiny little thing. So yeah, I like that playfulness.
No, great, really good, Sam. Any other comments, thoughts for Sam?
Yeah, I'd like to thank you for that. And I've sort of got a few gems of ideas myself out of it. First, starting with that Japanese woodcut, which I've seen so many times and never realized there are two boats in it with people. But just words and visions like Halcyon. You know, he's the kingfisher, the sacred kingfisher.
Yeah.
And we and the neighbours were having a fight over one because it would sit on the edge of her deck, which is where he used as an anchor to bore a hole in our palm tree so that he could nest in it. But just the Halcyon, the holy kingfisher, the eye of time, that undulating string of birds that we used that I could see from my mother's house when I was living in Tauranga with her. We couldn't see the coast because there's a cliff between us and it, but it was just low enough that you could see the migrating birds going along the top. And Titirangi, the end of the rainbow, which is a bit more interesting than having a leprechaun at the end of the rainbow.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm hoping the leprechaun at the end of the rainbow will be friendly to me, but that's a whole different story.
You'll never find the end.
Well, you see, I have inherited a quarter of a rundown Irish croft.
Oh, right. Well, I'm
which might be, what did they say, about 135,000 euros, or it might be a quarter of a lawyer's bill.
I think the Irish have won their gold with the victory over the All Blacks.
Yeah. Yeah, well, yes, you might have started something off here too.
You know, really nice, Sam, how you took us to some different places with your poems. You know, I've heard Sam recite live, and I hope you really enjoyed it, because you don't get to hear him recite much, so really appreciate it, mate. Any other thoughts, comments for Sam?
Hello, Sam. Lovely to see you.
Hey, Malky.
Thank you for that. I really enjoyed it. But, I went for the let it wash over me mode.
Well, that's what you do. That's what. There's another poet I really like called John Ashbery, and he always said, like, even if I forget half the poem, once you've got the mode flowing, then you can just sort of just soak in it. You don't need the ending.
Where it took me to was kind of memories of, so I don't even know when or where, but this idea that life is conscious and alive, and what a kind of wonderful space that is to be taken back to. I don't know when or where I discovered that space many years ago. I've forgotten about since, so I appreciate that.
Great, yeah. Well, as John Ashbery again said, the way that he constructs poems is like he lowers a bucket down into a well, which is his consciousness flowing through that well and his unconsciousness, and he draws the bucket up, and from that bucket he puts it on the page. So part of it is conscious, part of it's unconscious. But for me, I think, especially with Halcyon Ghosts, I'm coming back to live in my childhood home. A lot of it is also childhood nostalgia and that sense of amazement of being a child and discovering things. And language, when you discover it, you don't know the meanings, you're just sort of dancing around the associations, which give you a sort of window into this magical kingdom. And I think we're all trying to get back there, Malky.
Yeah, mate, that's correct. No, fantastic. Right,
There's one more thing I liked, Sam. I don't remember whose quote it was. You said the moment you move in a different direction, the world broadens. What was that?
Yeah.
Whose quote was that?
You move in a different. Oh, John Cage was probably the epigraph there.
Okay, thank you. That was good too.
Yeah.
I liked, you know, obviously the deco, the guy deco in the cafe, and how his picture on the wall formed part of that poem, and the, you know, what was being seen from the inside and from the outside of it. You know, I thought that was quite cool in terms of.
Yeah, I mean, that poem itself was quite not a difficult poem, but because I wasn't associated to the family, I didn't want to overly personalize it like I knew him as a family member. But once I'd written it, I talked to his widow, and we gave a memorial reading last year on the day that he died in the cafe, and all the staff were there, his widow, and there were lots of tears. There was lots of people who were moved. So the nice thing about that poem is that this year it will probably be put on the wall in the cafe as a memorial to him and as something people can read, because there is, you know, so many lines in that are connecting to Titirangi, to the Waitakere Ranges, plus that idea of Nazar, of that symbol moving back to Turkey. And this is where I have at the end of the poem the Godwits moving from the ranges back to the region where he came from in Turkey. So I tried to create a full circle with that to take Alex back.
Oh, great. No, really, really good, mate. Any other final comments, thoughts of Sam?
Well, I had one more comment. I just felt your poetry, Sam, is not just words and sound, but it seems to have a whole range of it. Like, it's visual, it's tactic, it is all aspects of a person, I felt, and including intuition as well. Like, I was transported to a more intuitive state of mind, let's say, but at the same time I'm able to visualize. I can see the birds and the words all merging, you know, and like the kauri tree. So yeah, thank you. I hope you'll come and speak to us again.
Yeah. Well, I think with poetry especially is that once it becomes intellectualized to a point that you understand it, then you lose that wonderment and you lose that amazement. So I write until I get to a point where I don't understand the work, because I think if you're in that suspended state, you can keep rereading your work and quite enjoying it because you're not sure what it means.
That is so good.
And that's
spoken like a true poet.
Well,
No,
and as another poet said, my work is accessible if you take the time to access it.
It's amazing. Yes, even Gurdjieff said, you know, when he wrote his book Being and Becoming, he would give it to the people in the community to read it, and if they understood, he would rewrite it.
Oh, true poet. I have to read that.
He was a great philosopher and a great teacher. So yeah, probably you are a poet philosopher.
Yeah, well, I did a degree in philosophy, but I decided that sometimes the more literal traditions were too logical for me. So Lewis Carroll was also a logician, and he wrote, and then he moved towards those sort of nursery rhymes and Alice in Wonderland, things like that. So I think he was trying to escape some of the logical connectors within his philosophy.
I think he was a member of the society.
Probably, yeah,
yes,
probably.
He was.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Suzanne.
I just wanted to say, I think if you lose the logic, you get a fresher perspective all the time. It doesn't die. It just
No,
lives
and I think that's what children have, don't they?
Yeah. And it's an eternal vibration that we all have.
Yeah.
It's really, yeah.
Sympathetic strings, that's what I call them, like on a sitar or an instrument. You have the main strings that have the melody, but then you have all these shimmering sympathetic strings around it that give you these sort of other worldly vibrations.
Yeah, if you listen, it's always there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, mate, great. Thanks, Sam.
Right.
Fantastic.
It's okay. Thank you.